My husband was in an accident and ended up in the hospital. No one came to see the old lady in the next room. I brought her food 3 times a day. Before we were discharged, she took my hand and whispered, "Run away from him. Before the story gets too much, write a few words about yourself, where you're from, and how old you are. I cherish everyone who's with me now. Enjoy listening." The call caught Yulia sorting through invoices. It was a typical Thursday. The office was stuffy, the air conditioner had broken last week, and no one was rushing to fix it. An unfamiliar number popped up, and she wanted to hang up, but her finger slid onto the green button. "Yulia Vladimirovna Makarova, this is the reception area of the 3rd City Hospital. Your husband, Gleb Andreevich, was admitted to us after a traffic accident." Yulia couldn't remember much of what happened next. She seemed to have dropped her phone. She grabbed her bag and ran out without turning off her computer or locking the office. In the taxi, she sat clutching her seatbelt, whispering something incoherent. Not even a prayer, but a request addressed to no one in particular. If only everything would stay as it was. If only the house wouldn't fall apart. If only she wouldn't lose what she'd spent 5 years building. Strangely, she hardly thought about Gleb himself, about his pain. She was terrified of the emptiness that could yawn if something happened to her familiar way of life. The trauma center greeted her with the smell of bleach and the hum of fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling. Yulia paced the hallway until the nurse pointed at the right door. Gleb lay on a high bed, his leg in a cast, hanging in a traction brace, a fresh bruise turning purple under his eye. She rushed to him, grabbed his hand, and the words poured out. "Oh God, Gleb, how are you? It hurts. What are the doctors saying? I was so scared when they called. I thought, that's it, I thought. Finally, you're here," he interrupted without even turning his head. "I've been lying here since lunch. Where have you been?" Yulia stopped mid-sentence, swallowing something bitter that had gotten stuck in her throat. "They just called me an hour ago. I came straight away. An hour." He chuckled, looking at the ceiling. "Okay, bring me something normal to eat. The hospital crap is making me nauseous. And buy some water, but only still water, you know that." She nodded, even though he wasn't looking at her, and walked out into the hallway, convincing herself that her husband was simply irritated by the pain, that the fracture was serious, and anyone in his place would be in a bad mood. Near the next room, on a peeling wooden bench, sat an elderly woman with a similarly plastered leg. She looked toward the exit, the way people do when no one's been waiting for them for a long time and who themselves have given up hope. Her slender hands rested on her lap. Her gray hair was neatly braided. "Can I help you?" Yulia asked, stopping. The old woman looked up at her with faded blue eyes. "Thank you, dear. I just went out to sit. It's stuffy in the ward." "And where are your relatives? Has anyone come?" The old woman shook her head, and there was so much familiar resignation in this movement that Yulia felt a twinge in her ribs. "My son works up north on shifts. He promised to come as soon as he gets some time off. I'm alone here for now. Let me get you something from the buffet. Do you want something to eat?" "Oh, come on, my dear, don't worry. It must be done," Yulia said, more firmly than she intended. "What would you like?" "Broth. Porridge." Vasilisa Nikitichna, that was the old woman's name, agreed to the broth and a boiled egg. Yulia went to the buffet, making 2 lists in her head. For Gleb, the cutlets he likes. Fresh bread. Still mineral water. For the old woman, something good for her after an injury. The difference between these lists didn't seem strange to her at the time. When she returned, she first brought food to her husband. Gleb silently took the container, opened it, and poked at a cutlet with his fork. He didn't even say thank you, just started eating, staring at his phone. "Do you need anything else?" Yulia asked, standing by the bed. "Maybe I should bring a book? Or, go ahead, you'll be here early tomorrow." She left and headed to the women's ward. Vasilisa Nikitichna accepted the broth with both hands, as if it were a treasure. Her eyes sparkled, reddened at the edges. "Daughter," she whispered, "Lord, how kind you are. Let me pay you. I have some. Here, take it." She reached for the nightstand, but Yulia gently stopped her hand. "No need. Really, no need." "I don't like borrowing," the old woman said seriously. "I'm not young anymore. I don't want to leave debts. It's not a debt. Eat it while it's hot." The following days merged into a monotonous routine. Early in the morning, Yulia would arrive with a homemade breakfast for Gleb and stop by the buffet for food for Vasilisa Nikitichna. In the evening, she would repeat the same thing with dinner. She helped the old woman to the toilet, once catching her when she tripped on the slippery linoleum. Vasilisa Nikitishna weighed so little that Yulia was afraid she'd break something else. The old woman thanked her every time called her daughter, every time tried to hand her crumpled bills, which Yulia invariably returned to her palm. Gleb became increasingly irritable. On the third day, he threw a spoon into the container so hard that the spray scattered all over the blanket. The same thing again, I'm tired of it. Is it so hard to come up with some variety? I can make something else tomorrow. Tell me what you want. I don't want anything. Go see your grandma if you're more interested there, and leave me alone. Yulia stood there, feeling the ground slipping out from under her feet, and continued to convince herself. He was exhausted from bed rest. He was scared. He wasn't used to being helpless. You're better than my own daughter to me, Vasilisa Nikitishna told her that same evening, as Yulia was adjusting her pillow. She smiled back, but it was crooked, because something inside her had shifted, like cracked ice on a river. On the fifth day, a thin man of about 50, unshaven, his cheeks sunken with fatigue, burst into Vasilisa Nikitishna's room. He fell to his knees in front of his mother, right in the middle of the room, grabbed her hands and pressed his forehead to them. Mom, I'm sorry it took so long. The guards wouldn't let me go, so I came as soon as I could. Sasha, my son. Vasilisa patted his head affectionately. You made it, thank God. And I wasn't alone here. Here, meet Yulenka. If it weren't for her, I don't know how I would have survived here. Alexander stood up, turned to Yulia, and tears welled in his eyes. Thank you. How much do I owe? I'll pay whatever you say. You don't owe me anything. That's not right, Vasilisa Nikitishna intervened. Sasha, wait. Yulenka, come here. She pulled a neatly folded handkerchief with cornflowers embroidered along the edge from under her pillow and placed it in Yulia's hand. Inside was a piece of paper, yellowish, worn at the folds. Yulia unfolded it and saw a Soviet 25-ruble note from 1961. Something inside it burst. What is this? She asked, and her own voice seemed strange to her, hoarse from the onset of tears. This is such a joke. I carried your food for 5 days, helped you, didn't sleep at night, and now you're giving me a piece of paper that even a store wouldn't accept. Yulia herself didn't understand where this rage came from. The accumulated fatigue, the sleepless nights in the chair by her husband's bed, his silence and reproaches, it all burst forth and spilled out on the man who least deserved it. A familiar voice came from the hallway. Gleb stood in the doorway, leaning on his crutches, looking at his wife with a wry smile. See, there's no point in leaving where it's not wanted. It's your own fault. She'd earned a thank you. Vasilisa, without a care in the world, didn't take her eyes off Yulia's face. She extended her hand and gently squeezed her fingers, which were still clutching the old banknote. I didn't mean to offend you, daughter, she said quietly. I wanted to protect you from great trouble. From trouble that might be lurking in your own home. She tugged Yulia's hand and sat her down next to her on the edge of the bed. Listen to me, old woman. There are things that look valuable, but inside they're empty. These 25 rubles were once money, a lot of money. You could live on them for a month. And now it's just a piece of paper, a memory. Words are like that. It seems like love. It seems like family. But if you dig deeper, it's a lie. Gleb snorted at the door and hobbled back to his room. Vasilisa watched him with a puzzled expression, then turned back to Yulia. Let's go into the hallway, daughter. We need to talk. They left the room and sat down on the very bench where Yulia had seen the old woman on the first day. Vasilisa Nikitishna spoke quietly, leaning toward her. Tell me, Yulenka, you took care of me, a stranger's grandmother, for 5 days, but it was easy for you to take care of your husband. Yulia opened her mouth to respond and realized she didn't know what to say. He's sick. He's having a hard time. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm asking. Did this concern bring you joy, or was it just a burden? The silence answered for her. Now think back to the last few months. Vasilisa Nikitishna continued. Did he look at you the same way he used to? Did you have dinner together? Have heart-to-heart talks? Or did he increasingly turn his back on you? Yulia remembered. The late return, the phone, which he never left unattended, monosyllabic answers. In response to her questions, her back was in bed as she wanted to hug her husband. She remembered the dinner she cooked with love, and he pushed the plate away, saying, It's not tasty. Even though he'd asked for more. He just works too much, she said. But the words sounded pathetic even to her. Vasilisa Nikitichna rose on crutches and slowly moved toward Gleb's room. Yulia wanted to stop her, but the old woman waved her off. Stopping at the door, she asked loudly, loud enough for the entire hallway to hear. Tell me, young man, have you said a single kind word to your wife these past few days? She comes to see you every day, cooks for you, takes care of you. Have you ever thanked her even once? Gleb looked up from his phone and at the old woman with an expression of disgusted bewilderment. It's a wife's job to look after her husband. What's there to thank? Vasilisa nodded demurely, as if she'd heard exactly what she expected, and returned to Yulia. She sat on the bench, unable to move, while images of the past few months flashed before her eyes, forming a pattern she'd so carefully ignored. The old woman sat down next to her, took her hand in hers, and spoke slowly, gravely. My daughter will remember. A grateful person, a happy person. And whoever considers someone else's care duty will live their whole life a bitterness, and those around them will be poisoned by this bitterness. Yulia sat and looked at the old banknote in her palm, a piece of paper that once meant something but was now an empty shell, a memory of a non-existent value. And suddenly she understood with piercing, almost physically painful clarity. Her marriage. This is not a crisis that can be survived. It is a diagnosis. The conversation was interrupted by a phone call, sharp and insistent. He broke the silence of the hospital corridor so suddenly that Yulia jumped. She saw through the half-open door of the room how Gleb grabbed the phone from the nightstand and stared at the screen with the expression of a man caught unawares in the middle of something shameful. A single letter L glowed on the display. He hastily ended the call, glanced back at the door, and shoved the phone under the pillow with such a swift, furtive movement that Yulia felt a twinge in her chest. Who is it? She asked, entering the room and trying to sound casual. From work, he answered too quickly, not looking her in the eye, instead staring at his own hands on the blanket. They're calling about the project. They're driving me crazy. I'm lying here, and they're pestering me about every little thing. She nodded, but something inside her was clenching and wouldn't unclench. It was like that moment when you realize you've forgotten to turn off the iron, but you're already far from home. I remembered something that happened 3 weeks ago. Gleb's phone slipped into the sink while he was shaving, and he panicked not because of a piece of plastic or glass, but because of something vital, something he couldn't live without. He rushed to the repair shop that same evening, although he usually put off any task until later, finding 100 excuses, and he snapped irritably at her questions. Don't bother me. I'll figure out what you know about technology myself. Vasilisa waited patiently until Yulia came out into the hallway and beckoned her over with a dry, light hand. Don't ask anything now, she whispered, leaning close to her ear, so close that Yulia could feel the warmth of her breath. Ask. He'll lie again, only he'll become more careful. Learn to cover his tracks. If you want to know the truth, open your eyes, and to open your eyes you need evidence. Without it, you're just a jealous wife. But with it, you're a man who knows what he's fighting for. What evidence? Yulia felt a chill run down her spine, cold and prickly. You know what they are. His phone, his messages, his money. You've noticed, right? He hides the screen when you're around. He turns away, waits for you to leave the room. Yulia noticed, many times, but each time she found an explanation, each time she reassured herself. Work correspondence that shouldn't be shown to strangers. The anniversary surprise he's secretly preparing is simply a modern habit of keeping one's phone to oneself. And how does your mother-in-law feel about you? The old woman asked, changing the subject so abruptly that Yulia was taken aback. Lydia Vasilievna. Well, Yulia hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound like a complaint. She thinks I'm not good enough for her son, that he could find someone better. She says so, straight to my face. Not directly, but she makes it clear, constantly. With every look, every sigh, every comparison to some friend's daughter who cooks better, earns more, and respects her husband as she should. Vasilisa shook her head solemnly, and in this movement there was the bitterness of a person who has seen too much in her life and who can no longer be surprised by anything. There are families, a daughter, who demand obedience from their wives as long as she is needed in the house, as long as they serve them, and when she gets ready to leave, empty-handed and guilty of everything, without a penny, not a corner, not a kind word. Don't fall for that. I've seen many like that in my life. Yulia wanted to object, to say that the Makarovs were a normal family, that her mother-in-law was simply strict, demanding, raised in different traditions, but the words stuck in her throat, unwilling to come out. She looked through the glass door of the room at Gleb. He was sitting propped up by a pillow, his phone already out and typing something, a soft, gentle smile playing on his lips, the kind Yulia hadn't seen in a long time and one that clearly wasn't meant for her. Yulia didn't sleep that night. She sat in a chair by her husband's bed, listening to his even breathing, looking at the shadows cast by the light from the hallway, and thought about the old woman's words, replaying them over and over again. Gleb fell asleep around 2 o'clock, overcome by painkillers, and his phone lay face down on the nightstand, as always, as every day of their life together. Before it seemed like just a habit, but now it looked like evidence. She stood on tiptoe, trying not to creak the chair, not to knock against the nightstand, not to give herself away with a single sound. She picked up the phone and walked to the window, where the streetlight provided enough light to see the screen. Password. She tried their wedding date, the very date he'd sworn to remember forever, but it didn't work. Gleb's birthday didn't work either. Then she typed in Gleb's birthday, adding the year, and the screen flickered and unlocked, revealing what had been hidden. Messenger opened immediately, her latest messages hanging as unread notifications, and Yulia saw a conversation with contact L, whose profile name was Love. Hearts, sweet words, photographs. A woman in her 30s with chestnut hair, in a summer dress against the backdrop of the sea, in a restaurant with a glass of wine, in some apartment with white walls and modern furniture. I miss you. When will you come? I can't wait any longer. I love you, my dear. And Gleb's answers. The very words he'd been telling me, Yulia, for a year now, maybe even longer. The very intonations she'd almost forgotten. One message hit her in the gut, knocking the air out of her lungs. Just be patient a little longer, darling. She trusts me completely. She doesn't suspect a thing. I'll sort this out and we'll be together. I promise. Yulia read and couldn't cry. Her tears had run out somewhere along the way, dried up inside before they could spill. Completely trusting. That's what her trust was in his eyes. Not a virtue, not a sign of love, but a weakness, easy to exploit. A tool he'd exploited for 5 years of their marriage. She scrolled through the correspondence further, unable to stop, even though every message was painful, and found screenshots of bank transfers, 15,000, 20,000, 15,000 again, every month regularly, from their joint account to a card named Love N. She remembered how she'd skimped on clothes, bought cheaper lotion, refused to go to the hairdresser, worn the same coat for 3 seasons, putting money aside for a rainy day, for the future, for the children they'd planned. A rainy day had arrived, but not the one she'd been preparing for. Yulia turned off the screen and put the phone back exactly where it had been, face down, in the same spot on the nightstand. Gleb didn't move, didn't even change his breathing. She returned to the chair and sat there until morning, staring into the darkness and feeling something reshaping inside, like a house after an earthquake. The walls were the same, but the foundation was different, and it was no longer possible to live in this house as before. In the morning, she went home to get a change of clothes for Gleb, she told him, and he just nodded, not looking up from his phone. The apartment greeted her with silence and disarray. Dishes in the sink, scattered clothes, an unmade bed, dust on the shelves that no one seemed to be wiping. She opened the top drawer of the dresser, where important documents were kept, and froze, not believing her eyes. Empty. The apartment's title deed, the sales contract, the register extract, her savings book, their shared papers. Everything had vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there. Yulia searched the entire chest of drawers, then the closet, then the desk, then the mezzanine, to no avail. She dialed Gleb's number, trying to sound calm, casual, and unsuspicious. Gleb, do you know where the apartment documents are? I wanted to find the insurance policy, and it's empty. At my place, he replied with irritation, not even trying to hide his displeasure. It's safer this way. There's nothing to do at the hospital anyway, so I'm sorting through the paperwork, getting things in order. Why do you need the apartment documents now? What's there to organize? A pause, long, heavy, then coldly, abruptly, in a tone that brooked no argument. If you trust me, don't interfere, he said. I'm sorting things out. He hung up, and Yulia remained standing in the middle of the room, clutching the phone so tightly her fingers ached. The old woman's words proved prophetic. He wasn't just cheating, he was laying the groundwork, clearing his escape route, ensuring a profitable exit. The apartment was bought during the marriage, but registered in Glabe's name. It was more convenient, easier with the paperwork. That's what he said then, and she agreed without a single objection because she trusted him, because the word family still meant something. Now the word sounded like a mockery, a taunt at her naivety. That same day, Yulia found a lawyer with good reviews online and signed up for a free consultation. Sitting in a small office across from a woman in a formal blouse, she described the situation hypothetically without naming names, trying to speak detachedly, as if she were talking about someone else's life. Property acquired during marriage is divided equally according to the family code, the lawyer explained patiently and matter-of-factly, even if the apartment is registered to one spouse. But you need proof of joint payments, bank statements, utility bills, and transfers. Anything that confirms your participation in the acquisition and maintenance of the property. And what if this person has already taken the documents for himself? This does not change anything from a legal point of view. The right of ownership does not depend on the location of the papers, but it complicates the process and delays it. I would advise starting to collect evidence right now without delay, screenshots of bank transactions, copies of any papers that can be obtained, witness testimony if there is someone to confirm it, and most importantly, don't warn the other party of your intentions until the last minute. Yulia left the office with a confident heartbeat. For the first time in many days, she felt not confusion, but a clear understanding of what needed to be done. That evening, she took screenshots of all her bank statements for the past year, saved them in a separate folder on her phone, and copied them to a cloud storage service Gleb couldn't access. The vague feelings were turning into a clear picture, and this picture, despite its ugliness, brought a strange relief. Now she knew the enemy by sight. The next day, Lydia Vasilyevna showed up at the hospital. The mother-in-law entered the room with a pot of homemade soup and pounced on Yulia from the doorway without even saying hello. What the hell is going on? Glabe's calling me, complaining. His wife's keeping him half-starved, feeding him hospital gruel, while she herself is wandering off to who knows where. Do you even think about your husband or just yourself, like all young people? I bring him food every day, Yulia began, but her mother-in-law was no longer listening, brushing her words aside like an annoying fly. She sat down next to her son on the edge of the bed, and her voice instantly changed to a cooing, honeyed, completely unrecognizable tone. Glabushka, my dear, here's mommy's soup, real, homemade, not that store-bought junk from packets. What can you expect from young people? They don't know how to do anything except spend money and chat on the phone. Then she turned to Yulia, and her face became hard and judgmental again. Why are you standing there like a pillar? You've probably made a mess at home. She's hanging around the hospital, running to other people's old ladies with her charity work. Gleb told me everything. You cheat your husband, but you help strangers, as if you'll get a medal for it. Yulia remained silent. Previously, she would have started making excuses, apologizing, explaining, arguing, but now she simply listened and memorized every word, every intonation, every disdainful glance. That evening, Lydia Vasilyevna called her at home. Gleb complains that you've become nervous, twitchy, taking offense at every word. Keeping a man is work. Sweet, daily, thankless. You don't know how, but learn before it's too late. You know how it is. Wives come and go, but the family remains, and no one will remember your name. I understand, Lydia Vasilyevna, Yulia said evenly without emotion. Thank you for the advice. In the hospital hallway, she accidentally bumped into Semyon Viktorovich, a distant relative of Gleb's who had worked there as an orderly for many years. He looked at her strangely, with sympathy in his gaze, clearly wanting to say something but hesitating, searching for words. How's Gleb? He finally asked, eager to break the silence. They're getting better. They'll be discharged soon. That's good, that's good. He paused, glanced around, and added quietly, Listen, Yulia, if anything happens, don't count on Aunt Lida. She'd tear anyone's throat out for Gleb. Whether he's right or wrong, no matter how much you prove it. A mother's love is like that, blind. Yulia nodded, without asking what he meant, without asking how he knew. She understood everything anyway. On the day of Vasilisa Nikitichna's discharge, Alexander arrived early in the morning, loaded his mother's simple belongings into the car, discussed recommendations and medications with the doctors, and completed all the paperwork. The old woman was being taken to him in the countryside, where her family would help her while her leg healed completely. Before leaving, Vasilisa Nikitichina called Yulia into the hallway, took her hand with her dry, weightless fingers, and squeezed it as hard as she could. "Remember what I told you," she whispered, looking Yulia straight in the eyes. "Preserve everything you've seen and know. Don't trust empty promises. Don't trust pretty words. If you need me, Sasha will give you my number. Call me anytime. I'm old, but my head still works and I understand a few things about life." "Thank you." Yulia felt her throat tighten, making it difficult to speak. "I don't know what would have happened to me without you. I would have lived like this, blind, believing until the very end." Vasilisa smiled, warmly and sadly, with the understanding of someone who had been through something similar. "You brought me food. I opened your eyes. We're even, daughter. That's how life works, good for good. But not always in the same coin, not always as you expect." Alexander took his mother's arm and helped her to the elevator, supporting her every step. At the door, Vasilisa turned around idly and looked at Yulia with a long gaze. It seemed she wanted to say something else, something important, but she changed her mind, deciding that everything important had already been said. The elevator doors closed with a soft hiss, and Yulia was left alone in the empty hospital corridor, clutching an old Soviet banknote in her pocket. It no longer seemed like an insult, but had become something entirely different. This piece of paper, faded and useless in any store, had turned into a talisman, a reminder that sometimes it takes a stranger, a chance encounter, an unexpected word to see the obvious that's hiding right under your nose. The old woman came into her life by chance, but changed everything. She taught her to see with open eyes, to listen not only to words but also to silence, to defend herself where before she'd only tolerated. Being a good person is a blessing, but being good without the ability to stand up for yourself is a road to nowhere. And Yulia has been walking this road for too long. She stood by the window and watched as Alexander, down in the hospital parking lot, lifted his mother into the car. The door slammed. The car pulled away and disappeared around the corner. Now she was alone, with the knowledge she'd gained, the evidence she'd gathered, a clear understanding of what lay ahead and who she'd have to fight against. It was time to act. Gleb was discharged 3 days after Vasilisa Nikitichina's departure, and Yulia came to pick him up, as a wife should, silently, without reproach, without questions. The entire taxi ride, he looked out the window, she at her hands in her lap, and a silence hung between them that no one dared to break. At home, she helped him settle onto the sofa, brought him some water, and adjusted the pillow under his casted leg. Habitual movements, performed mechanically, without the warmth that was once invested in them. "You've become somehow strange," Gleb said, looking up at her. "You're always silent. Did something happen?" "Nothing happened," Yulia answered evenly. "I'm just tired." She went into the bedroom and began to gather her things, only her own, personal ones, those that belonged to her before and during her marriage. Clothes, documents, photographs of her parents, a few books, cosmetics. The suitcase they'd bought together for their trip to Turkey 3 years ago filled slowly and methodically, and each item packed inside sliced off another piece of their past life. "Where are you going?" Gleb appeared in the bedroom doorway, leaning on a crutch, and for the first time in a long time, something akin to confusion sounded in his voice. "To Mom's. I'll stay there for a while." "What do you mean? You'll stay? What, are you leaving?" Yulia zipped up her suitcase and straightened up, looking at him straight on, without her usual desire to look away. "Yes, Gleb, I'm leaving. Because of what?" "Because of that old woman and her nonsense." "Yulia, you're a smart woman, aren't you?" "I saw the correspondence with love," she interrupted calmly, and this calmness, it came surprisingly easily to her. She saw the translations. She saw everything. He fell silent, and in that silence there was more truth than in all his words for 5 years. Yulia picked up her suitcase, walked past him into the hallway, and put on her coat. "Yulia, wait. Let's talk. It's not what you think. I can explain." "No need," she said, opening the door. "I already figured it out." The taxi was waiting outside. She climbed into the back seat, gave her mother's address on the other side of Voronezh, and spent the entire ride watching the streets pass by, feeling neither relief nor pain, only a strange emptiness, which, however, was better than the heaviness, something that had been weighing on her for the past few weeks. Natalia Mikhailovna opened the door, saw her daughter with a suitcase, and didn't ask any questions. She simply hugged her tightly, like a mother, and quietly said, "Come in, your room is waiting." That night, Yulia lay in her old room, listening to the ticking of the wall clock that had hung there since her school days, and looked at the familiar cracks in the ceiling, the faded wallpaper, and the shelf with the books she'd read in her youth. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. "I'll only be upset if you suffer and endure," her mother said that morning at breakfast, pouring her tea into a cup familiar from childhood. "But if you've decided to live like a human being, I'm glad. It's been a long time." The court summons arrived 2 weeks later. Gleb had beaten her to it with a divorce petition, apparently deciding that a good offense was the best defense. Yulia took the envelope, opened it, read it, and told her mother without a tremor in her voice, "I'm ready for this." At the first meeting, her representative, the same lawyer she'd consulted with, laid out the facts clearly and consistently: jointly acquired property, loan payments from joint funds, regular transfers to other parties without his wife's knowledge. Gleb sat across from her, and his expression changed with each new document pulled from the folder. First bewilderment, then irritation, then something akin to fear. Lydia Vasilyevna waited in the hallway and, after the hearing, tried to calm her son, muttering something about insolence and ingratitude. "What's your position?" the judge asked, turning to Yulia. "I want everything to be done according to the law," she replied, looking straight ahead. "I don't want to win or lose. I want justice." The hearing ended without a final decision, and a new date was set. As they were leaving the courthouse, Gleb caught up with her on the steps. "Don't you have anything else to say to me?" he asked, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. "I've said enough today." A week later, Lydia Vasilyevna showed up at Natalia Mikhailovna's house, unannounced, uncalled for, simply standing there in her expensive coat, which looked odd against the backdrop of the old Khrushchev-era building. Her tone was no longer as sharp as before, rather tired, broken. "Can I come in? I want to talk." The three of them sat in the kitchen, Yulia, her mother, and her mother-in-law. Natalia Mikhailovna put the kettle on, but no one touched the cups. "Yulia, do you really want to go through with this?" asked Lydia Vasilyevna. "Think about it carefully. You're pressuring Gleb, but you're making things worse for yourself. Who would need you, a penniless divorcee?" "I'm not pressuring him," Yulia replied. "I'm defending my rights. Those are different things." "She's defending her rights." Lydia Vasilyevna shook her head and thought about what people would say about her family. Natalia Mikhailovna, who had remained silent until that moment, suddenly spoke up. "My daughter has nothing to lose by defending herself. But to endure and remain silent while she's disrespected is a loss. A real loss, Lydia Vasilyevna. I watched my daughter for 5 years. How she faded, how she hung her head, how she forgot herself. Enough." The mother-in-law fell silent, for the first time encountering direct resistance where she was accustomed to meeting submissiveness. She stood up and buttoned her coat. "Well, as you wish. I hope you'll at least part ways amicably, without any fuss." The day of the settlement agreement signing was overcast. The sky over Voronezh was covered with gray clouds, and a light rain was falling. Gleb arrived with Lydia Vasilyevna. Yulia was alone, calm, in the simple dress she'd worn before her marriage. The lawyer presented the terms. Yulia would receive monetary compensation for her share of the joint payments on the apartment, and the remaining property would be divided according to the inventory. Gleb picked up a pen, ready to sign, but Lydia Vasilyevna, she couldn't take it anymore. She'd brought it to this. She'd destroyed the family. "Who's going to marry you now? A divorcee?" Yulia raised her eyes and looked her mother-in-law straight in the face, for the first time in years, without looking away, without lowering her head. "Lydia Vasilyevna, if marriage requires silently enduring humiliation and turning a blind eye to betrayal, I'd rather live without such a marriage. And I'll be happier than I was before." Silence fell over the room. Gleb remained silent, not defending his mother. And this silence was more eloquent than any words. Yulia picked up the pen and signed. Her hand didn't tremble. As she left the office, Gleb paused in the doorway. "Forgive me, if you can." "I hold no grudge," she replied. But there was no turning back. Yulia rented a one-room apartment in a residential area, not far from work, small, overlooking a playground, with someone else's furniture and curtains. The first few nights, the silence oppressed her, and dinner alone reminded her of the past, but she didn't avoid these feelings. She learned to live with them, accepting them as part of her new existence. "You've changed, daughter," Natalia Mikhailovna said when Yulia visited her on the weekend. "You used to keep your head down, but now you look straight ahead." "Maybe because I'm no longer afraid," Yulia smiled. "It turns out being alone isn't as scary as I thought." Gleb called a month later and asked to meet. They met at a coffee shop near her work. He had lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his whole appearance suggested that the empty apartment wasn't such a pleasant place. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said, fiddling with his cold cup of coffee. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," Yulia replied. "I was just afraid to admit it to myself. Maybe we should try again? I've realized something during this time. I realized I was wrong." She looked at him. At the man she'd lived with for 5 years. The man she'd once loved. The man she'd trusted unconditionally. "Do you want to come back because you miss me, or because you're uncomfortable being alone?" He was silent, and that silence was the answer. Yulia learned from Alexander that Vasilisa Nikitichna was leaving for the countryside to visit distant relatives. "It's quieter there. The air is cleaner. There's someone to look after her." She took a day off and went to say goodbye. An old woman sat on the porch of a village house, peeling potatoes into an enamel basin. Seeing Yulia getting out of a taxi, she smiled the same smile Yulia remembered from their first meeting in the hospital corridor. "You've lost weight, daughter. But your eyes have become brighter. That means you've taken the right path. Thank you." Yulia sat down on the step next to me. "Thank you for everything. If it weren't for you then, give it up." Vasilisa Nikitichna waved her hand. "I just nudged you, and you walked on your own 2 feet. You were able to protect yourself. You were able to. That's great." The old woman put down the knife and wiped her hands on her apron. "The hardest thing now is to live without anger. Not everyone who hurt you. Villains. Some are just lessons. You've learned your lesson. Let them go. Otherwise this burden will stay with you. And you need it." Yulia drove away, looking back at the small house with its slanted fence, at the figure of the old woman waving after her. A chance encounter in a hospital corridor, an old Soviet banknote, a few conversations on a wooden bench, and her whole life turned upside down, taking a new direction. It was a clear autumn morning in Voronezh. The sun shone through the curtains of her rented apartment, casting golden streaks across the floor. Yulia woke up before her alarm, lay for a while, staring at the ceiling, then got up, made some tea, and went to the window. Below, the city was waking up. People were hurrying to work. Mothers were taking their children to kindergarten. An old man was walking his dog. Life went on, stopping for no one. The silence no longer oppressed. The loneliness no longer frightened. Yulia finished her tea, got dressed, took one last look at the room, small, strange, but already her own, and went to work. Love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself to the point of exhaustion. Living together means living honestly. And when honesty disappears, leaving becomes not a defeat, but salvation. She understood this now and accepted it as a part of herself.